Hello and welcome to today's PIR live event webinar brought to you by the Ontario Ministry of Education and Partners in Research Canada. My name is Stacey Joyce and I'll be your host tonight. If you're joining us live, remember that you can ask questions anytime throughout the webinar. No need to wait for a Q&A section. We'll just queue them up and ask them when it's time on your behalf. Please make sure when you do ask questions that you click on the drop-down menu for the To field and make sure to include attendees or everyone in that To field. That way the other people who are viewing this live will be able to see what's being asked. So today's guests we have numerous guests today, so I'm going to go one by one and they'll be able to give you a quick hello and a wave. Our first guest is Dr. Jeff Orchard. He is an associate professor at the Cheriton School of Computer Science. He's also cross-appointed to the Departments of Biology and Applied Mathematics. He's a core member of the Center for Theoretical Neuroscience, and he is, as of January, the Director of Computational Mathematics, and all of these things are at the University of Waterloo. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thanks for having me here. Hello, everyone.
Next up, we have Michelle Booth. She is a Technology-Enabled Learning and Teaching Representative from Waterloo Catholic District School Board. Thanks, Michelle. You have to say something for the video to go to you, though. Oh, there we go. You're muted. That was the problem.
Everyone.
Yes, we've been experimenting with the mute button, everyone, so sorry about that. Next up, we have Miriam Lapeare. She is a grade 6 teacher at Onondaga-Brant Public School and also a digital lead learner for Grand Erie District School Board. Thanks for joining us, Miriam.
Good evening.
And last but not least, we have Carlos Roque. He is a grade 5 teacher at St. Anne's in Waterloo Catholic District School Board. Hi, Carlos. Thanks for being here.
Hi, guys. Good night.
Okay, so the quick agenda before we dive in, I'm going to start by showing you how you can leverage the Virtual Researcher on Call program to invite expertise into your classroom for the purposes of coding and computational thinking here and computer science in general. And you can use this multi-purpose for other subjects as well. But I'll give you a bit of a practical look on how to get started and use that program. And after a few minutes of that, we're going to talk to Dr. Jeff Orchard, and he will give us sort of his expert point of view on the subject of coding and computer science and computational thinking. And then we're going to discuss with our 3 educators here today lots of sort of tried and true practices and projects that they've done in their classroom that you may want to try or create a twist of your own on and go from there. So without further ado, I am going to share with you my screen so that you can see in real time what's going on over here. Okay, so I have here the PIR web, the web page. And from here, you can see all the programs that PIR has to offer. Everything is free, so you can check out, poke around, see what might suit you. Particularly, I wanted to focus on the VROC program. The VROC program is all about a real-time interaction and using video conferencing, just like what we're doing today, but instead of a webinar where you are primarily a viewer who can communicate by typing in the chat, it would be a straight two-way video call with audio and video from the expert and from the classroom. So what you can do is, if you're interested, excuse me, there's a sign up button right in the header, and then it leads you to a choice. So you would go to K-12 educator, and you would just fill out this short web form, and that will give you automatic access to the entire program. There's not a lot to fill out here. That's the whole form, just that one page. And then you'll get an automatic email that gives you access to our expert book directory of experts. And within a day, often within an hour or so, you'll receive an invitation to the Zoom software to create a profile and use that video calling platform that we have available. We also know that you want to be supported when you're using tech in your classroom. So if you scroll to the bottom of any page, you'll see a quick link here to tech support. And on the tech support page, We have several screenshot documents about how to get started, how to place a video call, and then there are also some video call tips. Whether you use VRock or Zoom, whether you use Hangouts or Skype, there are definitely some general tips here for how you can prepare your students, how you can seek out an expert and what to tell that expert so that they can do the best job for your students. And then some tips for during the video call, how you can facilitate or get the ball rolling if your students are a bit shy, things like that. And there's also a link back to Zoom support because they have some really fantastic support resources there. I found them really easy to navigate through, to either browse or to search for something specific. So I would highly recommend, if you don't find what you need here, then you can certainly go there. So what I would like to show you now is back on the VRock program page. There is a link to our expert book directory here. And in that directory, you would sign in with the credentials that you're given as soon as you fill out that web form. And then you have access to just a keyword search. There are example search terms here, but you do not have to choose one of these. You can search for anything. So if I choose, if I spell correctly and choose just computer science, I can search for that. I could fill out grade levels or languages to filter down further. And in here, I would scroll through and see profiles, where my search terms appear in those profiles. I can see maybe a thumbnail image of that particular subject matter expert, their position, what university or college or research institution they're at, as well as some other details about who they're comfortable speaking to, when they might be available, an email to contact them directly to make your request, and even a web page in many cases for more detailed information. This is also a truncated profile here, so if you click on the name of that individual, you'll usually see at least a few more lines of information. Some of them are paragraphs and paragraphs. Some of them are just a few lines or keywords. And you can go back if that turns out to not be the correct person. And what I'm going to do here is actually do a find within my browser, and I'm going to look for Dr. Jeff Orchard, who shows up in the list. Fancy that. He's with us tonight. He's also a VRock expert. So you can see there the information you would need to contact him directly or find out more about him, etc. So I think that is the very quick version of how to get involved in VRock and what it can do for your class. You're going to get a bit of a hint of when we speak with Jeff. He wouldn't necessarily give the same talk to your students, but the nice thing is that you can email that expert ahead of time, whoever it is that may suit your needs, and you will be able to tell them your grade level for your students, what they already know, and what you're hoping to accomplish. So they can either just ask questions and be quite informal, or you could have the expert potentially give a brief presentation on what it is that they do, or maybe what it's like to be a researcher, or what career options might be available to your students in some cases. So I don't see any questions about that so far, and I will certainly be on the call at the end as well if you do have questions about VRock. You can also contact me any other time. There's contact information on the webpage. You can email me directly, and I would be happy to answer questions or even to do a test with you and help you get started. So that is one tool on the day. But now I would like to turn things over to Dr. Jeff Orchard so he can give you sort of a computer scientist point of view on the day. So off to you, Jeff.
Thank you. And in response to your thing about I don't have to be an expert about whatever I'm talking to a class about. Apparently I'm an expert in structures. Just last week I was talking to a grade 3-4 class about building structures and, my insights there. So, maybe I know more than they do, and it's just fun for them to see a face, right? But yeah, my main day job is computer science professor, and I like to take part in these programs and talk to classes and teach a little bit of Scratch, a little bit of LightBot, and these sorts of things. It's a lot of fun, but very useful. I firmly believe, and it's not just me, there are bodies that study this sort of thing, that there's going to be a shortage of people who can write code and operate computers. They're not all just going to be computer scientists. There's going to be computer science in pretty much every field. In fact, there already is a lot of computer science in many, many different fields. And I'm talking about things like just using an Excel spreadsheet, for example. That takes computational thinking. And so teaching people how to code, that's the sort of thing that that's the sort of skill that they're picking up. The coding comes up in pretty much well, not every field, many, many fields. I'm thinking of just university programs, biology. The biology programs teach a computer programming course because that skill is useful for running experiments and analyzing data. In rhetoric, I know a professor who's in computer science who studies or works with people who are in rhetoric. And they study different patterns of language use and different grammatical structures. And to be honest, I don't really know, but there are people in the arts that use computers to analyze data, analyze big corpuses of text. New media, of course, people who work in the graphic arts, like a graphic artist, making a lot of what they do is on a computer, but of course, maybe computer scientists and software engineers set that up, but you still require some computational thinking to use some of these things. Different types of drawing procedures and mechanisms will require you to understand some of the ways that computers interpret what you're doing and some of the methods that are available. Geography, I mean, GIS and geopositioning, all these things. I mean, think about when you're driving down the 401, heaven forbid, and I don't know about you, but now I keep my phone up on the dashboard showing me the traffic. How does it know that? That's computer science. That's people taking little bits of information from many, many, many different places, and in fact, many, many people's phones, and compiling it into useful information. And that, I think, is kind of the way of the future, this sort of so-called information age. We're social creatures, and at this point, we've become very good at extracting resources, and we get enough food and heat and that sort of thing. Really, what it comes down to now is our cooperation, and that's largely about passing information around. Like Uber, why does Uber work? Well, it's because the information's right there where you need it at the time. Actually, another example of this type of computation that happens in day-to-day life, my wife, who is a kindergarten teacher, it's challenging for her to record all the different things that the kids do to satisfy the different curriculum things. I don't know the lingo because I'm not a teacher. And so how do you record that? How do you efficiently record that and have it available to you later on in a nice compiled format so that you can use it? So some of her colleagues, they made a Google form. And so it's just a matter of bringing up the form, clicking on the right things, and boom, off you go. Creating that form and dealing with the spreadsheet that it generates requires computational thinking. So computing is really a general purpose tool. It's a sort of thing that for a while kind of had this mystique, this sort of like, oh, that's them. But it's all of us. We all do computational thinking every day. This is coding is really just sort of facing the fact that we have all these devices. We're all, not all, but almost everyone's carrying around this computational device that's far more powerful than anything I had as a kid. And there's just so much opportunity to move things around, move information around, process data. Coding is basically the ability to use these as tools to help us. General purpose problem solving. I study neuroscience in the brain, and I basically develop artificial intelligence neural networks. And to me, that's also a very, very exciting field. In the future, cars will be driven by artificial intelligence, probably better than humans drive cars. And how do we design these systems in an ethical way, in a smart way? They will malfunction. How do we control the quality of this code and make sure it does what we want it to do when we want it to do, How do we make it run efficiently so it doesn't get, you're driving down the highway and your car's operating system starts downloading an update or something and you go off the road. These things all have to be managed by computer science and coding experts. So I hope that you all get the idea that coding is important and useful, extremely useful. In addition, I like to also point out that to me and undoubtedly many of your students, it's actually really, really fun. I enjoy coding a lot. There are parts of my job I don't like, but when I know I've got half a day and I have to do some coding, I actually look forward to going to work. I'm like, okay, that's right, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do some coding. I really find it fun, and I think many of you will find it fun, and I'm sure many of your students will find it fun. So with that, I'll turn it back to the event, and thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff. I think you're right. What I've seen with the students coding in the classroom is just that they have those aha moments, right? When you spend time coding and maybe it doesn't work, maybe you go back and you debug something, and when it finally works, they are so excited and hooked on it. So it's a really nice thing to do. And I just wanted to ask you one question at first, and certainly if the teachers in the audience have any questions, please do send them in now if you have any questions for Jeff. What is sort of the top of your list for students for any learning opportunities that teachers can provide? So we're talking this time more about ongoing opportunities, a larger project, or incorporating computational thinking throughout the school year. Is there anything sort of on your wish list that you would like to see the students exposed to or given the opportunity to do?
I think exposure is a big thing, because trust me, when the kids get exposed, many of them will just run with it. I think for me, I don't know, I've not got a lot of experience with many different kind of learning languages, but I have played with Scratch and Lightbot. Scratch in particular, I believe you're going to see some Scratch later on this evening. If you show the kids some Scratch, show them just a couple little simple things, and then point them to this huge repository of different examples of Scratch programs, they will start to they'll take off on you. And before you know it, they know more about it than you do. It's really a fun language to play with. So I would say just show them Scratch. Show them Scratch, show them a couple of simple things, and show them how to see other examples of code.
Thank you. And we just have a comment here from one of our attendees saying that she really appreciated the comment, that idea that coding is something someone else does, that misconception. She says that's sort of what she thought too once upon a time. So I think exposure not only for the students but also for the educators, as this world we live in is certainly changing. So thank you so much for joining us in your evening, no less, and giving us your point of view on things tonight, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Code on.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. So I am going to let you go, Jeff, so you can get back to the rest of your evening there. And we're going to carry on to the more sort of practical bits of how you're going to accomplish these things in your classroom. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Booth, and she's going to take off with it, as she knows far more about doing this in the classroom than I do. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Okay. I'm sharing my desktop. If you can just let me know that you can see everything okay.
We can indeed.
Okay. So a couple weeks ago, we came together with Dr. Orchard, Stacy, and myself and did a pre-hour of code webinar. And I've got the link there for the pre-hour of code webinar if anyone didn't have a chance to check that out. Certainly, I know that December can be a really busy time of year, and so maybe some people will do those hour of code activities in January or February or any time of the year. People don't have to wait until Computer Science Education Week next December. They can actually start anytime. For the slide deck for today, we do have some resources here. So I've got the link here for you, and I actually have the link on each slide, so you don't have to be rushing to record any of the information. And I wanted to focus on 3 websites. The first one is the Ministry of Education one, that is EdgeGains. The second one I'm going to take a look at is the one from Toronto District School Board. This is their coding skills continuum. And the last one is just looking at the Hour of Code or code website again. So I'm going to start with the EdgeGains one. So the EdgeGains site is got some great information if you're just getting started, if you're trying to figure out what it is and why would you do it. A lot of those questions Dr. Orchard talked about tonight, about the fact that anyone can do it and that coding and computer science fundamentals and computational thinking that he talked about, some of that skill set is part of what we're doing and various jobs, whether it's someone that works in the graphic arts or someone that works with languages or any part. What's really great about this EdgeGains resource is actually all the way to the far right where there are some sample lessons. So clicking on that, we've got a column here that has coding without technology. A lot of times this is known as the unplugged activities. So you wouldn't actually need to use a computer to do those. One example of that for kindergarten, and you could use it probably in some primary grades, would be there's one that's called Mousetrap. Basically what's happening for Mousetrap is you just set up a grid in your classroom. And you could do this. A lot of schools have those linoleum tiles, and you can use those. And you basically have set up the grid and have students move around with a mouse trap on various parts. Students have to get to the cheese, and they're basically, you're giving instructions to move forward, turn right, that sort of thing. So there's one example from the EdgeGains site that's pretty good. And if we take a look at the coding with technology, many of these are looking at Scratch, which I know is really popular. And if I just have a look here at the using Scratch to make polygons for grade 6, what's great about this is it has information that is using the 3-part lesson. So it's got the minds on, the action, and consolidation, the 3-part lesson that teachers are familiar with. It also has some ideas for modifications, next steps. So if you wanted to be putting together a lesson, this is great. It's got the prior knowledge assessment. So really, because this is an Ministry of Education site, it really speaks to Ontario teachers. And there's examples from various grades. It's also great in that it's not too overwhelming with a whole bunch of tools. So again, that would be the first website, and that's the EdgeGains resource for coding. It's got great stuff on there and makes connections to the curriculum. The next one would be the Toronto District School Board site. It's actually a fantastic site. It has resources for kindergarten up to grade 8. And for kindergarten and the primary grades, they're focusing on Scratch Junior. And then starting in grade 4, junior division, then they move over to Scratch. So you would need to have access to those resources, and you could probably do some of the grade 4 work in an earlier grade. They also have a programming concept section. So a lot of the computer science fundamental sort of things where you're talking about logic and debugging and decision statements, and they explain those concepts. Looping, making decisions, that kind of thing. So this is teaching more about computer science, this part. The next part is some Scratch features. So they give you some kind of, it's specific stuff about the Scratch language itself. And then they have the essentials. So things like, how do I change the scene, or how would I change the costume? These are a lot of the questions that I know come up in the class, and we end up having teachers scrambling, trying to figure out, how do I do this? Maybe a friend in the class can figure it out. And finally, they have a resource section with a whole bunch of things on it. So I'm just going to pick something from the Curriculum Connections one to show you how wonderful this resource is. And again, only starting in grade 4 at Scratch. Before that, the resources are for Scratch Junior, so you would need to have tablets in order to do that. And let's say that we've got our examples by subject across the side. And let's say that we're going to pick Social Studies, the Time Machine one here in purple. So this lesson opens up, it has an overview, it makes connections to the overall expectations as well as the specific expectations. It's really a great resource. It gives you, the assignment itself where the students are picking a section of time and history, and then they provide an example as well as the kind of starter Scratch code, so your students don't have to develop everything and the sprites and everything directly from scratch. So actually, this Toronto District School Board resource is wonderful. It's something that they've been developing over a number of years. A really fantastic resource. Okay, so that again in the slideshow, that was the next resource, which is the Toronto District School Board site. So that one's there for you. And the last one that I want to look at is the code.org site and what's available on the code.org site. So this one is actually a really wonderful site. I know that last week we spoke about using the Hour of Code activities, and so that's just going to code.org/learn. And last week we looked at Minecraft, and under Minecraft we started and we picked the Minecraft adventure would be my suggestion for anyone, even in primary, getting started. Doesn't require any accounts, doesn't require you to install anything, and will work on a Chromebook or on a web browser, so it doesn't require any special computer or anything like that. So those are all wonderful resources that are part of the Hour of Code activities. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the code site actually has a lot of wonderful resources beyond that. And so if we're looking at that site, the section that you want to go to is, we were looking at the learn part. If we go to the teach part, we go into what they refer to as their code studio. You don't have to create an account if you're not trying to track anything. You can just use the resources. And this is American, so they're dividing it into elementary, middle, and high school, but the grades are listed there. And it's a wonderful site because they teach the computer science fundamentals, so things like variables, looping, decisions, but they also focus on some of the computational thinking, so things like debugging, breaking down problems, the sequencing, the patterns, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go and take a look at the elementary school one, where I was before. And if I just scroll down in the elementary school one, they have it divided in what they refer to as courses. I would say just play around with them. You might find course A and B are too easy for your group, but I'm going to just jump in here to the second grade one and take a look at the view course. In the view course, the students just get started. They have an unplugged activity, and they tell you off to the side what the concept is. So persistence, this is one of those computational thinking items. Programming, debugging, another computational one. And so they have some concepts in here. This one, they've got loops in there. They're talking about some of the computer science fundamentals. And basically, you just get started. You don't have to install anything. It gives you a very beginning part, and then you just work right inside of code website. So you're not going out anywhere to install anything. You don't have to worry about setting up accounts. Just go and you're learning those concepts about sequencing and loops and making decisions, and you can use the tools that are already there. So I think it's actually a wonderful tool, and you're not focusing necessarily on a language. The students learn the concepts, and then if they want to get into doing something, whether it's some kind of block coding or something else, then they have those concepts in place. And just again, my suggestion for anyone that didn't really follow along with Hour of Code, that you can take a look at the Hour of Code activities. My suggestion again is the Minecraft one and the Minecraft Adventurer. So we do have the link for our resources down here at the bottom. So we'll make sure that we're sharing that out in various ways. And just a reminder again, we've been talking a lot about computational thinking and what that is. This little visual comes from computationalschool.org UK. So this is a resource from the UK, Barefoot, or CAS is another way to describe themselves. So it's talking about logical thinking, evaluating problems, looking for solutions would be an algorithm, looking for patterns and using them, breaking down problems would be the decomposition, and the abstraction would be removing any part of a problem that you don't need. So as Dr. Orchard was talking about, when we're talking about doing things in our elementary schools, we're really talking about teaching computational thinking. We're not necessarily focusing on we're going to make you a computer scientist, or we're going to focus on learning a whole bunch of different computer science languages. So in selecting those 3 resources today, I was looking for ones that made curriculum connections. I was looking for some that had some of those computer science fundamentals, such as variables, loops, that kind of thing. And also I was looking for ones that taught some of the computational thinking concepts. So I'm sure there's some other great ones, and it was hard pressed to pick those. And I'm just going to check and see if we have any questions before I stop sharing my screen.
So far, we don't have any slide-specific questions, but we will certainly have time to come back around to that at the end. But thank you so much for sharing those great resources. I certainly wasn't familiar with all of them, and I hope that our audience feels like they have a bit more ammunition now. And I just love that graphic of the computational thinkers there.
It's very cute.
It's one of my favorites to really break down what it is that we're trying to get at here. And as you said, we're not necessarily even trying to breed computer scientists here, but the application of that computational thinking is so widespread. So I think that that's a really great goal for us to work towards. So go ahead, Michelle.
I think we had some questions about that with the last webinar about people wanting to have other resources. And I think as a teacher from K to 8 that you don't necessarily have the skill set to all of a sudden teach Python and various languages. There are teachers in secondary schools, that's what they do, and I think it's okay. When no one has that expectation, I don't think, for you to be teaching Python or other subjects in K to 8. It's more just these kind of ideas, making connections to the curriculum and computational thinking, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm finding from anecdotal stories that I'm hearing more and more of almost co-learning, and how the students are really appreciating that their teacher doesn't have to have all the expertise and answers. If they learn together as a group, there's a certain power in that too. So with that, go ahead, I'll let you.
I think we'll hear that from Miriam and Carlos. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I will let Miriam go ahead and share her screen. Thank you.
We're on the same wavelength then. I was just going to say, let's hear some classroom examples. So if you go ahead, Michelle, and click the stop share, then we will we'll sort of punt it over to Miriam, and you can tell us a bit about what's been going on in your classroom.
Okay, just going to get the slides up here. There we go. So I just wanted to talk or begin with a little bit about my journey. I started with Hour of Code, not knowing very much about coding or computer science. And then I wanted to take it a little bit deeper. So I was teaching grade 3 last year, and I applied for a grant through our school board for $1,000 to help improve problem solving at our school by integrating robotics equipment into the math and science curriculum. So the concept was that I was going to train my grade 3 students how to be the computer experts in the school, knowing that I had a staff that wasn't maybe as comfortable as I was tinkering with the robots. So that's what we did. I trained my grade 3s on 3 different types of robots. And then we had sort of an invitation to each classroom within the school that teachers could come in. My grade 3 students ran the centers. And so we kind of showed off the robots. And then from there, we had sort of like computer buddies in our school. So if a teacher needed an expert, they could call upon one of my grade 3s, and they would go down and be running the center in their classroom. We also paired up some classes, and they did some work with Hour of Code as well as with Scratch. And so that kind of took the pressure off the teachers that you know, were worried that they needed to be the experts. And I would say that that's been repeated tonight already, but that's the biggest thing you need to let go of, is you don't need to be the expert. And if you, Jeff mentioned, you know, giving the kids the power, because if you just give them a little bit, they'll find out way more than you or I could probably. So I just wanted to share on this slide, I have a bit.ly to a presentation that I did about robotics and math earlier in November. And in that link, it will take you to a file of all the things that I'm kind of discussing this evening. So I just wanted to show you some examples of what we did with the robots and how we tied it into curriculum. So the first robot that we introduced to the students was a BlueBot, or sometimes they're called, you can get BBots. They're by the same company. They're essentially the same thing. All the coding is done on top here. So it's simply up, down, left, right. And I picked this as a simple bot that a kindergarten grade 1 class could use. And the great thing about this is it runs on a 15 centimeter by 15 centimeter grid. So whatever you can invent, you can run the robot off. So some examples that we had, and I'll throw up some pictures in a minute perhaps. We had a mat of different coin denominations that the kids had to code and add together. We had a dice mat that I created, and so they would roll dice, and then they would have to add the numbers together and code the robot to go to that number. We created a number line, so students would be able to show, you know, 2 plus 3, and it moves forward to the 5. We had 2D and 3D shapes. We also created a whole map of our school, and I taught my location geometry unit with that map. So the students had to map out how to get from the grade 8 room to the staff room, or from the gym to the library, and that sort of thing. And there's some examples of how you can use that in other subject areas as well, for language or social studies. And so I'll just click some pictures over here. Hopefully you give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, so here's some examples of students using the BlueBot in the classroom. We used these cards so that the students were practicing their computational thinking of the direction that they needed to go. Here's a picture of our mapped out school. And this is just a picture that we did with training some of the teachers on how to use this 15 by 15 grid. And this is just a shower curtain that we drew the grid out on. So I didn't have one of the hundreds chart carpets, so we just got a mat from the dollar store, and away we went. So the second bot that I chose to do some work with was the AzaBot. And it works on a color coding system. And there's a picture up there on the screen of it working on an iPad, but you can just draw the lines on pieces of paper. So we did all sorts of work with fractions, where they were working on grid paper. We created scavenger hunts where for addition, subtraction, where the kids had to have the AzaBot move to the correct answer. We created clocks in my class for time. So the students had to code it, and then at the 12, 3, 6, and 9 have different activities happen. So they would code it to spin or move faster at those times. On the AzaBot website itself, you can download lots of games and lessons. So one of them is just it's a little maze board called the Butterfly, and there's basically 2 different colors. So the students, it became a probability lesson. They had to decide where they thought that the AzaBot was going to go. And then we also did some work with measurements. So I had them drawing different line segments of different lengths, and then they had to change the color or the code at different spots with that. So just to give you a couple of visuals of that. This picture up in the top right corner is actually, they had to code a pioneer village, and so the AzaBot had to go and visit different buildings within the village. This example here in the left-hand corner was the probability example. And then the kids really like just building their own maps. So you could turn that into, you know, mapping of your community. One of our students did the whole digestive system. So there was lots of ways to integrate it into what we were learning. And then the third robot that I introduced to my school was the Sphero. And this was for older grades. Younger grades, they can use it. There's a drive function, but then the older grades were able to get into some actual coding of the robot. So we did some time versus speed investigations, and we also created a whole village that the students had to code the Sphero to go through. And with that, we turned into, so we built 3D buildings with that. And then 2D shapes, they were also working on coding the shapes and having it draw it out on the carpet. And practicing some angles with a mini golf course that we created. So here's some examples of our mazes that the kids would build, and then you can build into that, you know, that you needed an obtuse angle or a right angle. We had our time and speed measurements that we talked about. This is our 3D city that we built, and so the students had to code the Sphero to go, you know, from the Tim Hortons to their house. And then the students also enjoyed building like obstacle courses and coding through the obstacle courses. So those are just a few examples of how you can take coding and tie it into robotics. I picked those 3 robots because I wanted sort of entry-level robotics that weren't going to be too scary and didn't look like big scary robots for people that don't want or are unsure about using technology. And I was really happy that after like working with the teachers in my school, a lot of them were using the robotics and signing them out. And because they had the grade 3s there as a support, sort of as a student ed tech team, that they didn't have to be the experts. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Well, thank you so much. We don't have any questions queued up already, but we do have a few comments. Everyone is in love with the shower curtain idea. I think that's pretty ingenious myself. And the idea that you're really getting some cross-curricular connections going. We definitely had a comment from one of our attendees about that. And I think that's been a bigger push, is the whole idea that life outside of school is not in discrete subject areas, and so there's a power in avoiding teaching that way and really doing these cross-curricular connections. So thank you so much for demonstrating that for us and ways that you made that work. Practical examples for those who are watching.
No problem. I just wanted to mention, since people like the shower curtain, the pictures here of the Sphero, we just used, these are paint drop mats from the dollar store as well. So if you're wanting the students to create a maze, like I have down here in the bottom corner, you know, they can fold it up, they can use it again, and it's not all over your floor, so your janitor will be happier with you as well.
I imagine those conversations have been had in a few places around their using robots. So thank you so much. Was there, I don't want to cut you off, was there anything else that you were planning on sharing, or have we reached the end of your examples for tonight?
No, I kind of wanted to show you where the next step could be.
Thank you so much for that. We've definitely had comments coming in, so no questions at this time, but we will have some time at the end. So if you do come up with a question and you're watching this live, just type it in as soon as you think about it, and we'll queue it up for later. So for now, Miriam, if you can go ahead and click the red stop share button, then, oh, we do have an idea here from someone else who is saying the shower curtain's great, the drop sheet, and also that apparently at Canadian Tire, tarps go on sale from time to time, and they've used that for a similar purpose. So lots of inexpensive options, because we all know that's important. So we do have one more guest with us who's been waiting ever so patiently to share his story with coding and his grade 5 students. So Carlos, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and you can share with us your experiences. We just need to unmute you, I believe.
There you go. Good evening, guys. I have a similar experience, not being able to know a lot of coding. My end of expertise is in the hardware. I'm able to fix computers, devices, but in getting into coding, I've come to understand that that's a different element to computing. So when I've started, I had not a whole lot of knowledge on what to do. So I started, like many of us, with the hour of code. And if I may advise anyone to start with that, that was a great starting point to not just for your students, but also for yourself on what really coding is about. In regards to that, I wanted to show you something that actually happened today. So I'm really glad that I was able to fix the hardware to be here tonight, because I wanted to show you something for you. The first thing that I wanted to share is a picture from Twitter that I got today from my students, because they had actually requested for me to do something that they had never asked for before. And I hope that you get to see the screen already.
Yes, we can see the screen now.
So today, before last recess, I was asked if we could have a coding meeting. And I mean, I don't know what a coding meeting is, but the students had asked us, we were working through our coding projects, if they could have a coding meeting. And in curiosity to see what that was going to be, I said, yes, come on, let's do it, right? And so what it meant after for them is that it was an opportunity for them to collaborate, to continue collaborating with the work that they were working at independently, and to see what kind of different learnings they had learned. So how do we input the new sound that we did? How are we going to do some of the other work? And what I wanted to share with you after is the project that they are working on. And so then what I'm thinking about, what does coding bring? It's natural, organic collaboration between students, teachers, and between all of us all together at the same time, trying to figure out how to get something accomplished. So then the project itself is what I wanted to share with you. So let me just get from this screen. Sorry. There we go. Here. For those of you who are not aware of Scratch, Scratch is basically what I would suggest to you, what you would do for the hour after you were done with the hour of code. The hour of code is going to take some degree and to some degree of interest as well too. So then now Scratch becomes the next level for which you can see what the skills have gathered, from the hour of code. So what this project has started is that a colleague of mine almost a month and a half ago sent me an MP3 player with a whole bunch of his student stories, basically spoken and with sound in the background. So I asked my students, what do you think we should do with this particular project? So they said, well, why don't we code those stories that were given to us in audio, and we use Scratch to create a visual representation of that particular story that they like themselves. And so what this student has done is that he has then created his own set of codes to grab that representation and to also learn how to grab audio and record it within his story. And so when I click the run button, which is that green arrow over here, then you will get to see his project. And so I'll give you a little preview of what he's done.
The Ghost in the Basement by me. It was October 31st, 1856. A little boy named Jeff was getting ready to go trick-or-treating. Before he could do anything, he had to put on his costume. He was going to dress up as a ghost. He couldn't find his costume anywhere. Boing. We asked his mom where it was. She said it was in the basement. Jeff wanted to go and get it.
The simplicity of the particular idea is that this kid has now spent approximately 2 hours invested in trying to get the idea of somebody else and something that he can create on his own with little to no experience of computer science. part of what the kids are learning to do is the mathematics that are involved in it, as well as the mindset that is created to make the mistakes and be able to create something as complex as this. If you take a look at the, as I click with my mouse, you're going to then get to see that every one of the things that he has created has required a different set of code so that you can interact with this picture as you get to use it. Other than that, like I said in the goal, being able to use Scratch and teaching, learning how to use computer science, one of the reasons why I brought it to my school is that working in a low socioeconomic status school, I have always felt that technology brings that degree of sense of equity, that with technology, we all have the same starting point.
Wonderful. I just love seeing what the students come up with. It always just sort of boggles my mind when we do sort of almost give them the key to the car and let's see where they drive. They come up with some really awesome things.
One of my favorite things I think that the students do is how they become experts in what they do. So now we actually in the classroom, as it was mentioned before, you have people who become the experts. And so then I can take a step back, become more of a manager of the actual lessons that I'm doing with coding. And the students themselves are the ones that drive the lessons themselves and also the assistants for each other, which in this end, it creates a great sense of communication. And when I have to do other projects in mathematics for inquiry, that collaboration that they do for coding carries itself on in other cross-curricular activities that I do.
It's so intangible, I think, to talk about how you're doing these coding projects and to think about it almost as a silo, but it really isn't, because the students along the way are learning not only curricular connections, but also how to work together, how to convey knowledge if they are the expert, how to follow instructions if they're not the expert. It's really, really fantastic what's coming out of this.
It's incredible the lessons that they get in learning how to make mistakes, and that the best coders are the ones who didn't quit. That and a new appreciation when they look at their Halo or their Call of Duty, that how many mistakes did it actually take to create that kind of complex type of game when we're making so many mistakes creating such simple apps with using Scratch.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't even mention that, but you're so right that the value here is also in those mistakes and the fact that they can continue to work on them. It's okay to make a mistake. You go back and you debug the code and it can work in the end. And I think so many other things, the students are afraid to make mistakes. And this, I think, is a bit easier for them to overcome that fear of making a mistake.
I think it's important when you have a math lesson and you remind them those mistakes that they made when they were doing coding, and how they were able to approach them with a smile or with a positive mindset, and not you just get it here into mathematics. You're just not taking the same approach in math that you are taking in coding. And what you got to do is, in the same way you make mistakes in coding, you're allowed to make those mistakes in mathematics as well.
Right. Well, I think we must have explained everything so well tonight that the teachers don't have any questions. Either that, or it's late in the evening and they're just not feeling up to up to prying in. I'm just reading through a couple things coming in now. Yvonne Lee is saying that she wanted to try Scratch for their high populations of recently immigrated students who either did not have the elementary or middle school Scratch or early computation training. Unfortunately, it's disabled in their classrooms. So something she intends to reactivate and offer Scratch for grade 9 and 10, open to code and engage them and keep them for grade 10 to 12. Is there anything else, Carlos, that you would recommend? Do you think Scratch is the best one at that point? Oh, I think you might be muted.
No, once you got to move on Scratch, you can begin to teach HTML. Then you can go into the DSO Pythons. At this point, they already have the foundation to learn any of the languages. They understand that the difference between Python and HTML is just a different understanding in the language. And so that at that point, there's many starting programs like Thimble, where you can start showing students how to manipulate websites and how to create their own websites for that, and using the same knowledge in coding that you do in Scratch.
Wonderful. And Donna is saying that she's really seen that evidence of students becoming experts. And she's commenting that some of the students who usually sit back and let others take charge and do the work, she finds with coding, it sort of brings them out and they want to really shine, and that's their thing. So that's really wonderful to see too. I do want to go back to Miriam with a question of if teachers maybe have a a limited budget or they just want to stick to one thing, either way, is there a single avenue of robotics, a single robot to buy, anything like that that you would suggest as a starting place? You just want to unmute yourself there and then.
Yeah, so it probably depends on what grade level you're teaching. The BlueBot and the AzaBot, I think they kind of have a limit of where you can go. But I have seen, like the AzaBot, for example, like there you can go into some pretty there's some pretty neat math lessons in the higher grades. So I shouldn't write it off completely. But I really like the Sphero because it can start off with young students. They can drive it on a device, and so they can just practice moving. And then as they get more comfortable with that, then they can go into the coding. So even with my grade 3 students, we started off with just driving it on the iPhone we were using as our device controller. And so I let them do that for about a month. And then after that, I said, okay, so now you need to code through those different obstacle courses that they were creating. And you need to code it to go from my classroom down to the office, which was at the other end of the building. And it was interesting to hear the conversations that happened, because the girls, you know, they started off with saying, well, you know, it's a long distance, so we need to put in a big number. So they put in a big number of how many seconds they thought it needed to go forward, and it got to the next classroom. So, okay, well, we add a bigger number. And then they were also going super slow because you can control the speed. So then there was a conversation about, well, we want to have control of the Sphero, but we need to speed this up or it's going to take all day. So they had that conversation. And then when they got to the corner, then there was another discussion about what angle they needed to turn it at. So there's a lot you can do with that. So the Sphero is about $150. If you keep an eye on sales, you can maybe get it a little bit cheaper than that, but it probably is your biggest range of students that you can touch.
Wonderful. I love hearing how the students naturally go through these iterations. I think we're afraid to do that as adults a lot of the time, that we think we have to really plan and get it all right the first time. And I know there's a Marshmallow challenge, if anyone's done that, where you get into teams and you're given tape, rope, spaghetti, like a raw spaghetti and a marshmallow, and asked to build the largest structure you can. And the funny thing that someone found when they did this time and again, and they recorded what different groups of people did as a trend, and they found that business students in particular turned out to be the worst at this, because they planned for 90% of the time limit they were given, and then tried to execute their plan at the end, and then found out that there was a flaw in the plan and it didn't work. And of course, the engineers were among the best performers because they already knew how to engineer structures and use shapes to make a strong structure. And yet the kindergarten students were second best because they weren't afraid to just try something and see how it worked and try again. And I'm seeing that in all of your examples of coding, that the students are really embracing that idea. And I think that must be why they feel so free to go for it and become the experts so quickly, because they just try things.
Actually, just to finish up, like follow on what Carlos was saying, like I noticed that in coding, sometimes it's my students with special education needs that are better at it because they're used to having to persevere, whereas my academic students get really frustrated because they're used to things coming naturally and they don't have those skills to debug when there's a problem. So I have watched that time and time again, and I find it really interesting.
That must be such a boost to their confidence too, I would imagine.
Yeah, I know when I did Hour of Code this year, the first 2 students that were done were my 2 students with IEPs. So that was really kind of an interesting observation.
Wonderful. So I do see that we're nearing 9 o'clock. I haven't come back around to you yet, Michelle. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation or point our audience to before we wrap up today?
No, great conversation. Thanks for having me tonight.
And just a last chance for Carlos, is there anything that you would like to leave our teachers off with, any advice for starting out, or sort of one nugget if you had to choose?
In the same way that we expect our students to be adaptive, then it's very important for us to be adaptive too with this stuff.
So true. And Miriam, any last thoughts before we sign off today?
I think just what I said earlier is that you don't have to be the expert. Just give the tools to the students and they will take you where they want to go, and you can learn with them.
It sounds like fun. I was watching all of these slides and pictures and thinking, I really like my job, but I'd really rather be an elementary school student in your classrooms. It looks like so much fun. So that could be your classroom too if you're watching us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to see these examples and hopefully draw some inspiration from that. As I mentioned previously, we will make sure there's a link to the slides. If you're watching the recording, it'll be in the description or the comments below for the YouTube video. And if you did register for the webinar to view it live or later, you'll receive an automated email with that information. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us today, to Miriam, Carlos, Michelle, also to Jeff Orchard, who was with us earlier, and to the Ministry of Education in Ontario for making this possible. If you want to find out any more information about any of the Partners in Research stuff that I showed you briefly at the beginning, you can find that at pirweb.org. We also had code.org as one of the sites to check out, and the EdgeGains resources at edgegains.ca. So do check those things out. And as our educator said, just try something out and see what the students bring back to you. So thanks for joining us, and have a great night, everyone. Bye now.